"Hey, kid, you're gonna freeze out there. That blanket all you got." The giant in the leather vest, Hell's Angel's death head on his back, was shaking so hard his voice cracked. 11-year-old Marcus didn't answer. He walked over, pressed the blanket into the man's chest. "My grandma gave me that. You need it more." The biker stared, then disappeared into the night. The next day, 20 Harleys roared under that same overpass, and the man they called Dog was looking for the boy who gave everything. To understand why a pack of Hell's Angels would adopt a homeless child, you have to rewind to a freezing December night under an overpass, where 11-year-old Marcus had nothing left except a threadbare blanket and the memory of his grandmother's last words. He'd been invisible for a year, but one biker saw everything, and what happened next would rewrite the code of an outlaw club. It started, as life-changing things often do, with a dead motorcycle. But to understand what happened next, you need to know what Marcus's life looked like in the 365 days leading up to that frozen carburetor on a December night. The blanket was the last thing his grandmother ever gave him. It was faded, gray wool, worn thin at the edges, with a hole near the corner that Marcus would tuck his thumb into when he slept. She had wrapped him in it on her final night, when the cough had gotten so bad she couldn't get out of bed, and she made him promise to always keep it close. 2 days later, the social workers came, but Marcus was already gone. He'd seen the foster homes that swallowed kids up in his neighborhood. He decided the cold was better than the system. For a year, the overpass on the industrial side of the city became his home. The concrete sloped just enough to keep the rain off if you pressed into the corner, and the noise of the trucks overhead drowned out the sound of a boy crying himself to sleep. He learned to panhandle at the intersection without making eye contact with the drivers who pretended not to see him. He learned which dumpsters behind the diner got the fresh rolls on Thursday mornings. He learned that being 11 and invisible could, in a strange way, keep you alive. But as December rolled in, the cold became a different kind of enemy. The kind that didn't care if you were smart or careful or invisible. Marcus had been shivering for 3 straight days when the motorcycle pulled off the road beneath his overpass. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The rider was huge. 6'4", thick arms covered in ink, a leather vest with the winged death's head of the Hell's Angels stretched across his back. His hands were almost purple, and he was cursing a carburetor that had frozen solid in the 14-degree air. His name was Dominic, but everyone called him Dog. He'd been on the road for 6 hours, trying to make it back to the clubhouse before the storm got worse, and now he was stranded under a bridge with a bike that wouldn't start and a body temperature that was dropping fast. Marcus watched from his corner. He saw the man's breath coming in ragged gasps, saw the violent shaking, and without a second of hesitation he crossed the cracked pavement. He was still holding the blanket. He pressed it against the man's chest. The man Dog looked down at him, stunned. His voice was barely a rasp. "Kid, what are you doing? That's yours." Marcus shook his head. "My grandma gave me that. You need it more." The biker tried to push it back, but the boy's hands were insistent and the cold had stolen his strength. Dog just stared, the kind of look that could cut through steel, and then he did something Marcus didn't expect. He stopped arguing. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, nodded once, kicked his bike back to life, and disappeared into the darkness. Marcus went back to his corner, shivering now harder than ever, and wondered if he'd just given away the only thing keeping him human. The next afternoon, the temperature had dropped even further, and Marcus was trying to warm his fingers against a small fire he'd made from a broken pallet when he heard it. A low rumble, then another, then a dozen more. 20 Harleys rolled up the shoulder beneath that same overpass, engines cutting in unison. And the man from the night before, the one they called Dog, stepped off his bike and walked straight toward where Marcus sat frozen. He knelt until his eyes met Marcus, then removed his own worn leather vest and draped it over the boy's thin shoulders. "You gave more than you had to a man who probably didn't deserve it," Dog said quietly. "That makes you family." The boy just stared at the vest draped over his shoulders. It was heavy, worn leather, still warm from Dog's body, with the winged death's head and the rocker that read Hell's Angels California. Marcus had spent a year being invisible, and now 20 of the most feared men in the country were kneeling in the gravel beside him. He didn't cry, he'd forgotten how. But his jaw trembled when Dog said it again, slower. "Family. You got a name, kid, Marcus. Marcus, you're coming with us. Grab whatever you got here." Marcus reached into the corner and pulled out nothing but a scrap of cardboard he used as a pillow. That was it. 21 people had driven past him that month and seen nothing. 20 men on motorcycles saw a brother. The ride back to the clubhouse was 3 miles. Dog wrapped Marcus in his vest, zipped him into his own jacket against the wind, and set him on the seat behind him. The boy's arms locked around the big man's waist, and the convoy rolled through the industrial district like a funeral procession for the life Marcus was leaving behind. When they pulled through the chain-link gate of the compound, a squat brick building with bars on the windows and a painted mural of a screaming skull on the east wall, more members were waiting. They'd gotten the call. Dog had sent a single text the night before. "Found a kid under the overpass. Gave me his blanket. We owe him a debt." That word, debt, meant something specific in this club. It wasn't about money. It was about honor, and an unpaid debt in the Hells Angels was a stain on every patch. Inside, the smells hit Marcus all at once. Motor oil, stale beer, gunpowder, and something sweet, like cinnamon rolls baking. A woman they called Mama Joe, the old lady of the chapter president, had been up since 4 a.m. cooking. She took one look at Marcus's hollow cheeks and frostbitten fingers and sat him down at the long wooden table without a word. She put a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and 3 pancakes in front of him. He ate so fast he threw up. Mama Joe cleaned it up, rubbed his back, and said, "Slow, baby. The food ain't going nowhere. Neither are you." That was the first time Marcus had heard anyone say he could stay. But the real reckoning happened in the chapel, the private room where the patched members met. Dog called church, a mandatory meeting. The president, a man named Stone who'd done 15 years at Pelican Bay and had a voice like scraping gravel, sat at the head of the table. Dog told the full story: the frozen carburetor, the kid's hands pushing the blanket against his chest, the purple lips, the way Marcus refused to take it back even after Dog told him he'd die out there. Stone listened without moving. Then he asked the room, "This boy got anybody?" Dog had checked. "No, parents deceased. Grandma died a year ago. No record in the system. He's been a ghost." Stone set his hands flat on the table. "Then we got a situation. A child is alive because one of us didn't freeze to death. That child is now in this clubhouse. He's been failed by every institution this country built to protect kids. So I'm asking, do we step up, or do we hand him over and become the 6th door that said no?" The vote was not unanimous. 2 members argued that bringing a minor into an outlaw club would put a target on the boy and the chapter. The Hells Angels were under constant surveillance by the ATF and local law enforcement. A child on the premises could invite a raid and the state could use it to take down the whole charter. One member, a man called Razor, said what others were thinking: "We save this kid, we might lose the club." The room went quiet. Then Dog stood up. He wasn't a big talker. He dropped a photograph on the table. It was a faded Polaroid of a 10-year-old boy with black hair and a crooked smile standing next to a rusted bicycle. "That's my brother, Leo," Dog said. "We grew up in the system. Foster home number 4 was the worst. I ran. He didn't. Leo died at 12 from an infection that a trip to a doctor could have fixed. Nobody took him. Nobody said yes." Dog's voice didn't waver, but the men who'd known him for 20 years had never seen him pull out that photo. He tapped it once. "I'm not asking you to save a kid. I'm telling you I owe my brother a debt I can't pay, but I can pay this one." Stone called the vote again. This time it was unanimous. The Hells Angels Fontana chapter had just adopted an 11-year-old boy, and the very next morning the world started finding out. A local news crew caught wind of the story after a tow truck driver named Eddie, who'd seen the bikes gathered under the overpass, posted about it on a forum. By noon, a reporter was at the gate asking questions. Stone refused comment, but that didn't stop the headline: "Hells Angels take in homeless boy, heroism or kidnapping." Within 48 hours, Child Protective Services opened a file. The caseworker, a tired woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd seen everything, arrived at the clubhouse with a court order and a sheriff's deputy. Marcus was legally a missing child. The state had no record of him after his grandmother's death, and now he was living with a motorcycle gang. The optics were a nightmare, but the club didn't bluff. Stone's old lady, Mama Joe, had a cousin who was a family lawyer in San Bernardino. By the end of the week, a petition for emergency custody was filed in Marcus's name, with Dog listed as the primary guardian. The judge, a former Marine named Judge Holloway, agreed to a home visit. He walked through the clubhouse, saw the room they'd converted, fresh paint, a new bed, a desk, school books, and spent 40 minutes alone with Marcus behind closed doors. When he came out, he told the court, "I've seen state placements that cared less about a child than these men do. I'm granting temporary guardianship with supervision." The courtroom erupted. CPS appealed. The story went national, but the public didn't see an outlaw gang. They saw the security footage from a gas station across from the overpass, grainy, black and white, time-stamped, showing a small figure crossing the road, wrapping something around a shivering giant, and then standing alone in the cold while the motorcycle rode away. That footage hit the evening news and then the internet. By the end of the month, 22 million people had watched it. The comments sections filled with people asking, "How many of us would have done that?" A crowdfunding campaign started by a stranger in Texas raised over $150,000 for Marcus's education before Stone shut it down. "We take care of our own," he told the organizers. The money was redirected into a trust managed by the lawyer, but the message was clear. The whole country was watching. And that's when the real enemy showed up. Not the state, not the media, but three men from a rival club who saw the viral footage and recognized the overpass. They knew the territory, and they knew that a Hells Angels chapter taking in a street kid meant a shift in the power dynamics of the underground. They sent a message, not to Stone or Dog, but to the school Marcus was meant to start attending on Monday morning. If the boy walks through those doors, the truce is over. Marcus had gone from being invisible to being the most dangerous person in the city, and he didn't even know it yet. Stone read the message 3 times, then called church again. This wasn't just a threat against a kid, it was an act of war. The rival club, the Vipers, had controlled the drug trade on the industrial side for a decade. Marcus's overpass was their invisible border. A Hells Angels chapter planting a flag there, even in the form of an 11-year-old boy, signaled a territorial expansion that the Vipers couldn't ignore. If Marcus walked into that school, the truce would shatter. Retaliation wouldn't be a drive-by or a fistfight. It would be calculated, surgical, and designed to send a message. Stone had 1 hour to decide whether protecting Marcus meant going to war. But while the men argued strategy in the chapel, Marcus was in the kitchen with Mama Joe, doing his homework. She'd enrolled him in the district's online program until the custody hearing was finalized, and he was already 2 grades ahead in math. That night, he was working on fractions when Dog walked in, his face like granite, and said, "We need to talk to the kid." Stone had made a decision. He would ask Marcus what he wanted to do. It was an insane gamble asking a child to weigh in on a gang conflict, but Stone's logic was simple. This all started because a boy made a choice. He gets a voice now. They sat Marcus down in the chapel, 20 men in leather circling the room. Stone laid it out. "There are bad men who don't want you here. They see you as a threat. If you go to that school, they might hurt people to get to us. If you stay home, they win. What do you want?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want to go to school. I never went to a real school. My grandma taught me at the kitchen table. I'm not scared." Dog's jaw clenched. Razor, the one who'd opposed bringing Marcus in, stared at the floor. Stone nodded. "Then we walk you in ourselves every day. If they want a war, they'll have to start it in front of 100 cameras." The morning of Marcus's first day, 40 Hells Angels showed up at the school gates, not with weapons but with book bags. Stone had called the press, the superintendent, and the sheriff. He'd made sure that every camera in the county was pointed at that elementary school. The Vipers' threat had assumed a quiet, under-the-radar execution. Instead, the photo that went viral the next day was of a tiny boy in a new red hoodie, holding the hand of a giant bearded biker, walking through a gauntlet of leather vests and camera flashes. The headline was not "Gang War," but "Angels Guard a Child's Right to Learn." But the Vipers didn't back down. That night, a Molotov cocktail shattered against the clubhouse gate. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The cameras won't be there forever. Stone knew that defensive PR wouldn't end this. He needed leverage. And that's when Mama Joe found the notebook. Marcus had been keeping a journal since the night under the overpass, a cheap spiral notebook he'd found in a dumpster. He'd written down everything he'd seen during his year on the streets. Who moved what, where the money changed hands, which cops looked the other way. He was 11, invisible and observant as a hawk. In that notebook were license plates, dates, drop locations, details of the Viper's entire supply chain. He'd drawn a map of the industrial district with every stash house marked, not because he understood what it was, but because he needed to know where not to sleep. That notebook was now a nuclear weapon in the hands of a biker club who'd spent 2 decades avoiding open conflict. Dog didn't want to use it. He's a kid. If this gets out, it puts a target on him for life. But Stone saw another path. The notebook wasn't just evidence. It was a key to the sheriff's department. The local PD had been trying to build a case against the Vipers for years, but witnesses kept disappearing. An anonymous tip with the exact location of a major drug shipment would be a career-making bust for a detective, and it would dismantle the Vipers without the Hells Angels firing a single shot. They just needed to insulate Marcus completely. A former intelligence officer in the club, a Vietnam vet named Sarge, handled the drop. He drove 2 counties over, mailed a thick envelope to the task force, and then burned the gloves. 2 days later, a coordinated raid hit 6 Vipers properties simultaneously. The club's leadership was arrested, the supply line shattered, and the threat against Marcus evaporated. The news called it the biggest gang takedown in a decade, and no one knew it was triggered by a homeless boy's journal. But here's the part that never made the news. When the Viper's second-in-command was led out in cuffs, he looked straight at a news camera and said only, "Ask the Angels about the kid." That one sentence, broadcast on the local evening news, was enough to start the investigation that Stone had feared. CPS reopened the case. The FBI's Gang Task Force, which had been monitoring the Hells Angels for years, smelled a new angle. If a child was the catalyst for a gang war, he was a witness, and witnesses could be compelled. The judge who'd granted temporary guardianship now faced pressure from federal prosecutors to revoke it and place Marcus in protective custody. Essentially, witness relocation for a child. The club's lawyer warned Stone that winning this fight would require something unprecedented: total transparency. The Hells Angels would have to open their books, show every dollar, prove that Marcus wasn't being exploited, and demonstrate that the club had no criminal enterprise that involved him. It was a risk that could collapse the entire charter. Stone called his final church on the matter. "They want us to prove we're not using him. We've been hiding what we do for 70 years. Now, for this boy, I'm asking us to open the door." The vote was not about Marcus anymore. It was about whether the Hells Angels could survive being seen clearly. And as the members placed their hands on the table, the answer would define not just a boy's future, but the legacy of a brotherhood that had always lived in shadows. The vote took 4 hours. Stone went around the table twice, letting every patched member speak. Some talked about their own kids, the ones they'd lost in custody battles or never got to raise. Others talked about the code: protect the innocent. A few admitted they were scared, not of prison, but of what the feds would do with their financial records. But in the end, every man at that table remembered the night 6 doors had said no to a dying biker, and the 7th door had said yes. They weren't going to be the door that slammed shut on Marcus. Dog was the last to speak. He didn't thank them. He just put his brother Leo's photograph back on the table and said, "This is what we're paying off tonight." Every man who couldn't protect a kid because he was too scared of what people would think. That debt ends now. He signed the transparency agreement first, right there in the chapel. Stone signed second. By sunrise, the club's lawyers had a 300-page financial disclosure ready for the court, showing every dollar of legitimate income from their motorcycle shop, their charity rides, their veterans outreach program. They had nothing to hide. The federal prosecutor, a man named Kowalski who'd spent 10 years trying to dismantle the Hells Angels, read the documents and said one thing to his team: they're cleaner than half the businesses in this county. The custody hearing was set for a Tuesday in March. The courtroom was packed. Marcus wore a new navy blue suit that Mama Joe had bought him, the first suit he'd ever owned. Dog sat behind him, wearing his cut, the death's head patch on full display. The CPS caseworker argued that an outlaw club was inherently unsafe for a child regardless of their finances. The prosecutor, pressed by higher-ups, argued that Marcus was a material witness who needed federal protection. But then Judge Holloway did something no one expected. He called Marcus to the stand. For 20 minutes, the judge asked the boy questions. Where do you sleep? What do you eat for breakfast? Who helps you with homework? What do you want to be when you grow up? Marcus answered everyone with quiet, steady confidence. He said he wanted to be a mechanic like Dog. He said he used to sleep on concrete, but now he had a bed with Spider-Man sheets. He said the scariest thing in his life wasn't the bikers. It was the year nobody saw him. Then the judge asked, "If I let you stay with these men, do you understand that some people will always be afraid of you, that you might be judged for the rest of your life for who raised you?" Marcus looked at Dog, then back at the judge. "Sir, before the Angels I was already judged. At least now I'm not alone." The courtroom went silent. Judge Holloway removed his glasses and set them down. He granted full legal guardianship to Dominic "Dog" Reyes, with the stipulation that Marcus remain enrolled in school and continue therapy. He also sealed Marcus's journal from any federal investigation, ruling that a child's survival notes were not admissible as evidence. The Viper's second-in-command, the one who had threatened the boy, was already serving 25 years. The gang was gutted. The conflict that had started under an overpass ended in a courtroom with a boy in a Navy suit, holding a biker's hand. But the real transformation was only beginning. Within a year, the Fontana chapter started a program called Blanket Run, a charity ride every December where members delivered blankets and winter supplies to homeless encampments across the county. It began with Marcus's blanket, the one Dog had kept, now framed and hanging in the clubhouse chapel. Every new prospect was told the story before they could earn a bottom rocker. This club doesn't just ride. We answer the door. Marcus graduated high school at 18, valedictorian of his class, with a full scholarship to a technical institute where he studied diesel mechanics. At his graduation party, 60 Hells Angels from 3 states filled the backyard, and Dog gave a speech so short it took people by surprise. "I was freezing to death under a bridge and a kid with nothing saved my life. I owe him everything. He's my brother, my son, and the best man I know." Marcus, standing in a cap and gown, finally cried, not from sadness but from the weight of being seen. The story didn't end there. 10 years after that December night, Marcus bought the lot where the overpass had been. He built a small community center on it with a free clinic, a soup kitchen, and a garage where kids from the neighborhood could learn to fix engines. He called it Ezekiel's house after his grandmother. The Hells Angels funded the construction entirely, and Dog, now retired, works there 3 days a week, teaching welding to teenagers who have never held a tool. And the blanket, it's still in the clubhouse. But if you look closely at the frame, there's a small bronze plaque beneath it, engraved with words Marcus wrote himself. "My grandmother gave me this to keep me warm. I gave it to a stranger to keep him alive." It turns out it was never just a blanket, it was a key. It opened a door nobody else would even knock on. Every winter, when the temperature drops, a new boy or girl walking into Ezekiel's house will pass under that same inscription. The 7th door never closes. That's the thing about the 7th door. It doesn't close when the story ends. It stays open, long after the engines have faded and the news trucks have moved on. Marcus's blanket began as a shield against the cold, became a key that unlocked an outlaw's heart, and ended as a permanent invitation. To every kid who's ever been invisible, to every stranger shivering on concrete, to anyone who's been told they don't belong. And what gets me, what really stays with me, is that the people who opened that door were the ones society had already written off. The Hells Angels, men with records and tattoos and reputations that made entire neighborhoods lock their windows. Yet when a freezing child walked toward them, they didn't see a threat. They saw a brother. They didn't call a social worker. They called a meeting. They didn't form a committee. They formed a family. And they marshaled every resource they had: lawyers, photographers, construction crews, and 4 pots of coffee at 6 in the morning to say, "You are not alone." Most of us will never face that exact test, but we face quieter versions every single day. The coworker who's struggling and no one checks on. The relative who's isolated because of politics or addiction or shame. The kid at the bus stop who looks hungry. The question isn't whether we'd adopt a child under an overpass. It's whether we'll walk across the pavement in our own lives, offer what we have, and refuse to take it back. 6 doors said no. 6 systems failed. 6 instincts to protect comfort and image and safety won out. But it only took one yes to change everything. So I've got to ask you honestly, would you have been the 7th door? Not the answer that makes you look good in the comments, the real one, the one you sit with when no one's watching. Because somewhere tonight there's a boy with a blanket, a biker with a frozen engine, a stranger who's one act of kindness away from being saved. And that one act might just be yours. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And share this with someone who's forgotten that quiet, stubborn goodness still exists. Be the 7th door. It never closes.